we do have this video here. This is a segment from MSNBC before it switched to MS Now, Misinformation Now. This is called "The Shutdown Will End, but what Trump and GOP stand for will stick with voters for years." Now, I'm assuming that what this is more or less a funeral dirge. The Democrats were very upset that some Democrats defected and decided to fund the government, allowing, among other things, SNAP funding for the impoverished, as well as funding for government employees. They didn't want that for some reason. So I guess we will see them complaining about this. I've never, this is got to be the first time I've ever heard Democrats complaining about, citizens getting benefits from the federal government. I've almost always seen them happy about giving away welfare and money to citizens. For once, this makes them upset. Not sure why, but maybe they'll get into it here.
Other than the New England Patriots possibly becoming the best, if not one of the best teams in the NFL,
I was deceived. I was robbed. I thought this would be a video about politics. I don't care about the New England Patriots, man.
They're looking good. The Pats are back. But also, and this is just Democrats, I get it. They have the best week that they've had in a year and a half. And then fear and loathing and the wringing of hands because they may reopen the government because, yes, there are some Democrats who understand that people are going hungry. And what have they done? They have found out and they have exposed a White House that is working overtime to give tax cuts to billionaires. At the same time, they're working overtime to take SNAP assistance, to take food assistance from working Americans. And
so there are no new tax cuts under the spending plan that the Democrats were fighting over. I did hear that what the Democrats wanted to do was repeal, I believe it was called, essentially they wanted to repeal, I believe it's called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I just want to look this up, make sure I'm not misspeaking. Yeah. It was done by Trump. And the big beautiful bill extended a lot of these provisions. So they essentially wanted to get rid of a lot of these. They were mad about the tax cuts. And by the way, tax cuts weren't just for the rich. It was for a lot of ordinary Americans as well. They were mad about the low taxes because they were like, oh, well, where's the free stuff gonna come from? Gotta get more money from the citizens so that we can give the money back to them in other forms. I jest somewhat. But yes, they wanted essentially to repeal that. And the Republicans were going for it. Now, one of the provisions as well was protections against keeping illegal immigrants from getting health care. And, when you could have debates about that. One of those forms of health care I actually think was fine. I think it's like we probably should be giving illegal immigrants this form of healthcare, which is like the emergency care, where it's like if they're coming in to an emergency room after like a gunshot wound or something, like, no, I don't want this person to bleed out or die of sepsis or something. I want this person to have healthcare. And like what? Like this person is probably going to get like apprehended and deported. Like, is there any reasonable expectation the person's ever actually going to be able to pay for the healthcare? I think that's fair. Because also, if you put the burden on them to get the healthcare, what they'll probably do is just avoid hospitals altogether. And then if they do that, then it's like, well, then they may bleed out or die or whatever. I don't want that to happen either. But, no, Joe Scarborough, they're not trying to get new tax cuts. They're just trying to keep the taxes the same as they are now. And no, these taxes were not just for the rich. It's for, ordinary Americans. If we're talking about gross revenue, sure, most of the revenue that is being saved when it comes to the people who are receiving the tax cuts are the rich, but it's only because they're so rich, right? Shave off 1% of taxes for every single American citizen. And of course, the rich are going to be receiving a gross tax cut that is larger than the tax cut that someone who is far poor would be getting, but it's just because that 1% is a lot less for that person than it is for the rich.
SNAP assistance, to take food assistance from working Americans. And this has exposed just how much The Republican Party hates the idea of helping working Americans, helping middle-class Americans who are struggling with health care.
Interesting. I don't like putting in these value statements where like, oh, if you like these people, you'll support this law. If you don't like these people, you won't support this law. I see this most obviously and blatantly with gun control, where it's like, oh, if you don't support gun control, then you hate children. Like, no, you can agree that there's a problem and care about the problem and still have different perspectives on how to solve that problem, right? And so similarly, you can have Republicans who care about healthcare, but, disagree with Democrats on how to solve that problem. So no, it's not that Republicans don't care about middle-class Americans who are struggling with healthcare. It's that they disagree on what the solution is.
So you take that, and you take the massive win that Democrats had this past week, massive, historic in some ways, where Steve Bannon said, Democrats erased 10 years of Republican gains in one night. And why did that happen? Donald Trump said it happened because of the government shutdown. So all this fear and loathing and all this whining, I wish Democrats for once, just once, could take a win and then understand the Republicans, they were never going to help working Americans. They learned that through this process. So you know who else learned that through this process? The American voter. Donald Trump was exposed, and the administration was exposed, and Republicans were exposed as the party that fought like hell to give tax cuts to billionaires,
There's no new tax
to
cuts in the spending
multinational
plan,
corporations, right? To the richest of the rich.
Let me look this up because they keep saying this over and over again extremely confidently, which like it takes a lot of bravado, courage, to say something so emphatically and it not be true. Well, let me see. This is from the Tax Foundation. Well, this is from the Big Beautiful Bill. The question I'm asking is, are there new tax cuts in the spending plan that are not that were not included before? Okay, how the Trump administration is giving even more tax breaks to the wealthy. Oh, dang it. Here, let's look this up. With little public scrutiny, and this is from the New York Times, by the way, the article is how the Trump administration is giving even more tax breaks to the wealthy. With little public scrutiny, the Trump administration is handing out hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts to some of the country's most profitable companies and wealthiest investors. The Treasury Department and Internal Revenue Service, through a series of new notices and proposed regulations, are giving breaks to giant private equity firms, crypto companies, foreign real estate investors, insurance providers, and a variety of multinational corporations. The primary target, the administration is rapidly putting a 2022 law intended to ensure a sliver of the country's most profitable corporations pay at least some federal. No, the administration is rapidly gutting a 2022 law intended to ensure that a sliver of the country's most profitable corporations pay at least some federal income tax. The provision, the corporate alternative minimum tax, was passed by Democrats and signed into law by Joseph R. Biden. It sought to stop corporations like Microsoft, Amazon, and Johnson & Johnson from being able to report big profits to shareholders, yet low tax liabilities to the federal government. It was projected to raise $222 billion over a decade. But the succession of notices the Treasury and IRS have issued beginning this summer means tax could bring in a fraction of that. These breaks come in addition to the roughly $4 trillion package of tax cuts that President Trump signed into law in July. Legislation passed entirely by Republicans heavily benefits businesses and the ultra wealthy. So I'm not seeing that these this is tied at all to the spending plan. If I remember correctly, there are certain federal agencies, among which may be the Treasury Department and Internal Revenue Service. Don't quote me on this. I'm not 100% sure of this, but I am aware that there are certain government agencies. We see this mostly with like the ATF and stuff. They can unilaterally declare things legal and illegal. They can, just write up these new regulations and say, all right, you owe this now, or oh, you can't own that now. It's not entirely unusual, but I also don't see how that is at all tied to spending plan. So I'm not seeing any indication that the upcoming 2026 spending plan for the federal government was at all tied to tax cuts for the rich at all,
And we learned just last week they were trying to extend those tax cuts to even more billionaires, to give them even bigger tax cuts at the same time.
Wait, okay, hold on. Let me look this up then. Extending tax cuts. It's a very specific claim. I'm glad that he's making specific claims. Yeah, all this stuff is with the big, beautiful bill. Okay, on ACA tax credits, I don't think that's no, this is not relevant. So I don't know what the heck he's talking about.
Corporations to the richest of the rich, and we learned just last week they were trying to extend those tax cuts to even more billionaires, to give them even bigger tax cuts. At the same time, they were fighting like hell to stop working Americans from getting basic food assistance. And just a helping hand, just a little helping hand with our healthcare costs. So, yeah, the government shutdown is going to come to an end, but the reality of what this Republican Party stands for today, the reality of what Donald Trump was fighting for this past week, that will stay with voters for years to come.
By the way, it was the Democrats saying no funding for SNAP and all that stuff. So, the Republicans wanted a clean CR. They got the clean CR that funds SNAP, and all the healthcare spending and stuff is all up in the air still. This just buys time. So the Republicans haven't stopped the Democrats from doing whatever they wanted to do with healthcare. There were even some indications from Mike Johnson that they might compromise it all. But what they didn't appreciate, what they didn't like, and what they didn't want was the attempt to use American citizens, especially those who are poor and impoverished, as political hostages. Which, I mean, to be fair, Democrats got all the wins that they wanted. So it's like, what with the election? So what more could they have asked for with the government shutdown? But still, I think just the fact that they shut the government down over this sort of drew the ire of a lot of Republicans.
Yeah, we will return to our top story, Drake May, a little later in the morning. But right now, in terms of the shutdown, it's interesting to see how this is being received. Because I think we have to look at it in two different ways. There's the sort of short-term impact and the long-term impact. And like last night, a lot of Democrats deeply unhappy by what happened last night. A sense, particularly from the progressive wing, but not entirely, that this is a weird moment to cave. The Democrats had momentum coming off of the election night win. Polls only getting worse for President Trump and the Republicans. They're squarely taking the blame here. There's some
and look, I was wrong, by the way, in my video where I predicted that the government shutdown would have lasted until the Friday, or no, the Saturday after. I think it was either the Friday or the Saturday after the Democrats won all their elections. I was wrong. I was wrong by 4 or 5 days. So when you look and see, this thing happened that was politically expedient to the Democrats, and all of a sudden, no, they're doing this thing here, ending the government shutdown. I wonder why that's the case. I think the reason was the Democrats got all they wanted. They were able to blame two centrists and to Democrats the shutdown on the Republicans, which boosted turnout probably and helped them win, even though a lot of those elections were safe anyways. I think it certainly tipped the scale in some more contentious and close elections, of which were not the majority, but certainly were some. And also, it's like, what more could they ask for? I don't think that the Democrats actually wanted the impoverished to go hungry. And if they can negotiate and get some of the things that they want without starving citizens, then by all means, that is what they should be doing. So, you know, this idea is like, I wonder why in the world Democrats voted to fund the government again after they won all their elections. Well, it's like, I wonder if the answer to that question is in your question itself.
Really want to push Democrats to push the advantage, bargain harder, get a better deal. And it's true, they did not get a guarantee to preserve those Obamacare subsidies. There's going to be a vote later next month, it looks like, but not a guarantee that it'll happen. But there are some good things that did come of this deal, Joe. To your point, obviously, government workers are going to start getting paid again. SNAP benefits are going to be restored. There's going to be a moratorium on layoffs, the federal workforce, and the restoration of those who have lost their jobs. And I think for Democrats, short term, there's frustration, but long term, yes, they have used this shutdown to underscore the point you just made. Republicans are out of touch. Republicans don't care about the little guy. Republicans care about the wealthy and the tax cuts for the rich and building ballrooms and the like. We can go down the list. So I think that's where we are right now. There's a lot of sort of unhappiness in the party last night. Why did we blink now? Yeah. So many people said to me, my phone was blowing up last night with unhappy Democrats. But I think those who like the deal say, look, we need to take a step back. Yeah. We're playing more of a long game.
Very true. He has a more measured and reasonable take. I will say there's nothing wrong with enhancing the ballroom. You know, if it was, I don't know what the state of the ballroom was like. I've never seen it. But if it was run down and dilapidated or needed some refreshments, I'm all for updating it. And that has nothing to do with whether or not the government is shut down, right? I heard that contractors still got paid throughout the shutdown, so like, you know, why send them home if they would have gotten paid anyways? Let them continue to work. I frankly don't care. I also think a lot of the people who are complaining about the ballroom are really just either tribalist partisans, or they're gesturing. They're doing political signaling. They don't really care about it, but they just want to find something to criticize the Republicans about. And if someone who was an independent or someone who was Democrat was doing the same thing, they would not care. Right? So that kind of hypocrisy is, I find somewhat annoying.
Listen, I understand people who are intense on the left, just like when I was in Congress, I understood people who were intense on the right about government shutdowns and keeping them going forever and ever and ever. I also understand, though, when you have people, let me go to John Bresnahan, because John was there with me during our government shutdowns back in the 1990s. John, you always have people like me. You always have the extremists in Congress raising their hands and going, the American voters will remember this forever. They will remember. They will see that we're... No.
And he was a Republican at the time, I believe.
It's just not true. It's not true. We used, as you know, in 95 and 96, even though we lost those shutdowns in the short term, we used those shutdowns to define the Republican Party as the party of balanced budgets. We all took it. We all took it home. And yeah, Bill Clinton won the 96 campaign, but we won Congress 96, 98, 2000, 2002, 2000. I mean, we stayed in power for a decade, and every Republican went out there and said, we balanced budgets, and we did it 4 years in a row for the first time in a generation. Now that's the first time in 100 years. But we used that government shutdown to frame what we were the next decade.
Well, I mean, what the Republicans have defined themselves by, and, you know, Joe Scarborough here is speaking from the perspective of the Republican side, right? So let's be fair, and we can speak from the perspective of the Republican side this time around. Republicans have used this government shutdown to set a very important precedent, which is you cannot use the American people as hostages for your political aims. And if you attempt to do so, especially in such a gross and blatant way as what the Democrats have done here, literally, people, I saw articles sort of I use a different term because I don't know if this is explicit language technically or not, but tiptoeing around, the subject, saying, oh, the Democrats said behind closed doors that they were using this as leverage to sort of, get their political agenda passed or accomplished or whatever. No, they weren't just saying, well, maybe they were saying this behind closed doors, but they were also saying it in public. There are clips I've seen of at least 3 Democrats publicly in interviews literally saying that they were using this as leverage to get their agenda through. And what this established is that you cannot do that successfully. If you attempt to do this, you will fail. You cannot use the starving children of SNAP beneficiaries in order to, get done what you want to do. So I think it's very important. I don't know if anyone will ever try this again, saying we will starve SNAP recipients if we don't get our way. I cannot see this happening again in the future. And if it does happen again, it will not work. And I think there will be blowback in a way that we did not see this time around, in large part because we have sort of defaulted into blaming Republicans for every government shutdown and not the Democrats. But a lot of that is people being used to Republicans always being the one causing the government shutdowns. So if the mainstream media goes out and says, hey, it's the Republicans' fault that the government is shut down, that is a narrative that has been true for so long that people will just assume that it's true, especially if you're not observing politics very closely. They'll assume that it's true again, and they'll just keep on going on their merry way as they go to Best Buy or wherever it is they like to frequent, in their daily lives. So I would say that Republicans have certainly defined themselves here with this government shutdown.
I'm not asking you as a reporter to get involved in this. I'm asking you, though, just to report on how government shutdowns work. And when people are running around with their hair in fire on the left saying, oh, this is the end of the Democratic Party, they should look to last Tuesday and look to next year and understand that these government shutdowns, more than anything else, they define where the parties stand, and that stays in cement through the next election.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I do think there's a danger here. There could be another shutdown in January. We'll get to that. But I think with the shutdown, what you have to do is you have to, as a leader or leaders, you walk your party into a very extreme position, and then you cut a deal as the leaders to go back to the center or move back toward the center, toward a compromise, a government, a bipartisan deal, and you've left your people can't make that pivot as quickly as you can. And I think that's what we're seeing here. This was the Democrats, by all measures, have won this shutdown, quote unquote, but you're 40 days into it. Where's your end game? At some point, like you said in your opening, you got to declare victory and just, and move on, because
it's not over until the spending plan gets passed. It's not over. This is not likely going to be over until January. Right, I am not sure that the Democrats and Republicans are going to get together and find a way to resolve this by the Thanksgiving and Christmas and holiday breaks. So it probably will be when Congress is back in session on January that we will actually start to see movement. And once we sort of see how the tenor of conversations is, then we'll get an idea of whether or not we'll have another government shutdown. But that's when the end game will take place. So, hey, we are 2 months out from this whole thing being resolved. Let's not say, where's the end game? Where's the end game? The end game is 2 months away. Just be a little patient, a little patient.
This wasn't going to end. What happens if it ends next week or 2 weeks? It's not going to end any differently.
Right. And, Caddy, we also have a couple things happening right now. What we saw this past week.
Her name is Caddy?
What we saw yesterday was the news of Donald Trump ordering his administration to do everything to keep food assistance from working class and middle class Americans, his own people.
He was doing everything that he could to keep it from getting unilaterally spent on them. And I believe, I looked into this a little bit. it seemed like what he wanted to do was he wanted to prevent certain funds from being drained, because otherwise they would not be able to provide other forms of aid to children in schools for like school programs or something like that. Also, of the funds that the judicial branch wanted Trump to use the executive branch to spend money on for SNAP, there was not even enough money for that. And I guess the money printer is closed or something when the government is shut down, so more money could not have been borrowed to spend all the money needed to fund SNAP. So funding SNAP fully was already impossible. Trump was sort of fighting to protect funds that were already designated for a different purpose. He was actually out there fighting to have the government funded. He was calling for the filibuster to be ended, which, nobody really wants to do because it's been a long-standing practice. Apparently, it's something that's always been the case in the United States of America. I didn't learn it still recently. But he wanted to end the filibuster rule, which would have allowed just a pure majority to pass a spending plan, which would have removed the need for any Democrats to sign on to any plans at all. So like in that sense, it wasn't that he didn't want SNAP funding to be sent. He wanted it to be funded fully through the proper channels, if that makes sense.
Working like hell. It was screaming headlines. He was ordering states. Oh, you states that think you can help working Americans in red state America, stop. Don't do it. He did everything he could to make sure no food assistance got to those Americans who needed it the most. Again, a lot of those people who voted for him. What's the second part of this? Absolute chaos in airports. Now, if these Democrats on the left really want to take a chance, and I mean they really want to take a chance on this turning ugly against them, then continue the chaos that we saw at the end of last week and through this weekend. Continue that through Thanksgiving, or moving up to Thanksgiving. It gets ugly and it gets unpredictable. Yeah, this was not a perfect ideological win. The battle for healthcare justice, that continues. But again, it continues with this debate framed. The whole world knows where the Republican Party stands. They don't care that healthcare premiums continue to explode. Just ask MTG. They don't care about anything, it seems, out of the White House, except for cutting taxes for the richest of the richest of the rich. And again, last week they announced more of these cuts. They don't care about working Americans. They
said last week more cuts were. He said something like this before. Hold on. November 10th. The video was posted on November 10th. So the week of November 2nd. Okay. So there's this article listing changes on the. See, every time I look this up, every single thing that he's citing, whenever I look up information about it, everything is pertaining to the big beautiful bill. Look. Guys, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but the big beautiful bill has already been passed. It's been passed months ago. None of this is new. You guys are fighting to repeal something that has been passed by Congress and Trump. I don't even know how legal. Well, it is legal technically for you to undo a lot of what's been done. The Republicans do the same thing with Obamacare, but still. You're acting like the Republicans are trying to do something new. No, you're the ones trying to do something new. You're trying to raise taxes. Now, I will say it's clever framing to say, oh, Republicans are trying to cut taxes versus saying, oh, Democrats want to raise taxes. Raising taxes doesn't really sound super cool. That's why Democrats always say the rich at the end of all their tax plans. But none of this is new. This is relatively perturbing that he is misrepresenting what's happening here.
They care, again, about granting clemency to felons. So, all right, that's a pretty good place for Democrats to be as they move forward and debate where this country goes over the next year.
Yeah, yesterday I booked my son a ticket by train as a backup for Thanksgiving, paid an extraordinary amount of money to get one of the very last train tickets from Boston to DC, and that's when I thought, you know what, this is going to have to change, because there are millions of Americans who are making similar backup plans for Thanksgiving and whose Thanksgiving is going to be ruined, and we're only 2 weeks away. So
interesting. Well, yeah, we now see how sad those Democrats are that poor people are getting to eat. I'm being facetious. They're more upset that they didn't get the political victory that they wanted. I understand that the polls say that Republicans are getting blamed for it, but really it's just hard for me to blame this on the Republicans when, the Republicans had all the votes they needed except for like 4 or 5 to fund the government, and it's the Democrats who are holding them up. Kind of hard to blame the Republicans for the government shutdown when as many of them as possible were voting for the government to stay open. It wasn't them voting for the government to be closed, it was the Democrats. So